Hey, thanks for coming. I'm very reluctant to talk about this subject today, but I feel I need to. I've had a request to talk about the story of Shikajiba and Kudela, which is found in Vashistha Yoga. So he asked me to make a video about that. And he really doesn't know what that all implies. So I've had to think very carefully what to say. The best way to keep a secret is not to tell it. But it's too late for that. So one of the unintended consequences of doing this video is that I could be seen as a sex guru. And I really don't want that. Don't know how people can avoid doing that or not. So I'm going to do my best just to skirt around the issue as best I can. So some of the more advanced people sometimes wonder, where does sexual energy fit into all the stuff about the Kundalini and the Shakti and all that? And what you see, if you look at other gurus out there, they don't talk about it. And the reason is one of two reasons. They know, and they know that there's consequences for telling people about this. All the 8 limbs of yoga cannot encompass the energy itself. So it's in the progress, your spiritual progress, you go through Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Patanjali doesn't talk about sexual energy out in the open, does he? Mm-mm. It's hidden in the 4th chapter, the section on it being absolute. You see some hints in some of the iconography. Here's a picture of Shiva Shakti. I'm going to put a link to the Abhyam from a Tibetan tanka. There's one in particular where the guy in union with his consort, his eyes are bugging out. Okay. So I'm going to be deliberately backing away from anybody to ask me questions. I'm going to charge them money. I'm going to do all sorts of things to discourage them. Problem is, once people figure that out, I still am going to be tracked down and pestered. Part of the issue has to do with, so when you look at people that have gone down this road before, Rajneesh had sex with his disciples, and he was persecuted for it. Is that really what anybody would ask for? Okay, having said all that, let me get started. And I'm going to start with a rhetorical question. If the sexual energy is so important, how come people haven't made a study of that, of some yoga of that? And the answer is they certainly have. When you look at Kashmiri Shaivism, it's disguised by the word spanda, the pulse. You see in the story of Krishna how he has sex with 16,000 women, the gopis in Vrindavan. You see when the churning of the ocean of milk, Vishnu helps to churn the ocean of milk. And then in order to take the amrit that's produced away from the demons, he takes the form of a beautiful woman called Mohini. Okay, you may not have heard any of this until now. So either the people that teach don't know, or they don't want to give somebody a loaded gun. This is powerful stuff, Maynard. And the story of Shikajiba and Kudela is an example how the sexual energy is used to transform reality. I was talking to somebody today about how the sexual energy, when it's applied, can tear the fabric of reality. And told the story of Bishma, who in the Mahabharata incurred the wrath of a woman, wrecked her plans for her marriage and her life. And she vowed that she would kill him after he refused to marry her to pay for wrecking her life. He refused. And so she wanted to find somebody that would be her champion and kill Bishma. All the people she went to refused. Bishma could not be beaten. To go against him would be certain death. Finally, in despair, she decided she was going to go kill herself and drown herself in the river. She went to the river, and by chance, she came across a sage and talked to him for a minute or two, and she realized he had the power to make things happen. And so she begged him. She wanted a way to kill Bishma and told him this. Okay, so he argued with her, said this is not a good thing. She wouldn't have any of it. Finally, the sage said, okay, here's a bamboo reed. Go into the forest. Here's a bow. Make an arrow for this bow. When she went to the forest, she sat down, she found an arrowhead, she fashioned it, she found some bird feathers, she fashioned that and put it on. She had her arrow. All of a sudden, she became aware of somebody looking at her. She turned around and saw a man with a green skin. She didn't know who it was. It was Shiva. He handed her a black and white checkered handkerchief and said, if you want to back down, this is the time. Otherwise, take this handkerchief, tie it to the arrow, and your wish will be granted. She didn't change. She took the arrow, tied the handkerchief to it, shot it off into the air. As soon as she did that, she dropped down dead. Later, she was reborn as the daughter of a king, who Shiva came to the king in a dream and said, this is your son. And this is this woman, reborn as a man. Later on, she changed her sex, was a demon, and became a man. There's a story, we'll go into all that story. But here is somebody that tore the agreed upon illusion by the use of the sexual energy. The story of Shikajiba and Kudela is similar to that. Shikajiba was a king, and Kudela was his queen. They both studied with sages and saints that came by to the kingdom and would reward them handsomely. But Kudela had more time than Shikajiba, and she spent her time meditating and became realized. Shikajiba couldn't understand why she was so radiant. And Kudela, because she had more time after she was realized, spent the time to learn to acquire superpowers, like flying through the air. Didn't think it was wise to tell Shikajiba she could do those things. Shikajiba decided finally that he wasn't getting enough spiritual advancement as he hoped as king, so he was going to go off into the forest. Talked briefly to Kudela, and she said not to do it. Because he said not to do it, he decided he was going to leave in the middle of the night, so he wouldn't have to have a trouble partying. Now, you got to realize that Kudela, even though a realized being, wanted to be with her husband. That was her desire. When she found out, and she had great sex with him, I mean, it was perfect for her. So the next day when she found out, she flew in the air to try and track him down because he had said he wanted to go away. She knew that he had. She saw him while she was still in the air and was going to come down and entreat him to come back. You got to imagine, this is a woman that had everything she wanted. all of a sudden taken away from her. But she used her psychic vision and saw that it was going to be useless. So she turned back and went back to the kingdom and told everybody the king was out on a mission. And she ruled in his stead for 25 years. And she was waiting for her husband to become more spiritually advanced. Finally, she saw that he had, through her vision, she saw that he was advanced enough that she could go and approach him. So she set up a trustee to look after the kingdom while she was gone, and she flew through the air to where he was. But she was worried. She says, in her mind, she says, well, I really want him to be with me, but maybe he's not going to, maybe I'm just projecting that he will accept me, and he won't really. So what she decided to do was to become a young man, a gender change. She did that, and she appeared in front of Shikajiba, who was wonderstruck by her appearance and took her to be a very advanced spiritual being, and decided he wanted to be her student, his student. Kumba is his name. So think about this for a minute. Here's this woman that all she wanted to be was beside her husband. All her happiness that she had was here in front of her. And yet she had to decide that she would take on the cloak of being a man, right next to who she wanted to be united with. What determination. So they agreed, and Kumba and Shikajiba traveled throughout the forest every other day. And Shikajiba's awareness grew by leaps and bounds. But Kumba couldn't stand it. She decided, okay, perhaps he's more advanced than when I first met him in the forest after 25 years. So one day she said she was going to go to heaven and talk to her father. She told Shikajiba that Brahma, the creator, was her father. And she went back to the kingdom, conducted business, and came back around sunset. When she landed, she she put on a very unhappy appearance as Kumba. And Shikajiba said, well, please tell me what's going on. And Kumba said, I made a mistake. I was coming back at evening time just a little bit ago, and I saw this very powerful sage named Durvasa, who was also flying through the sky. And the clouds were encircling him like a dress, sort of flying. And I joked and said, oh, you're rushing to meet your lover. And Durvasa got extremely, he was known for having a hot temper. And he said, he cursed me. He says, all right, for your joke, you're going to become a woman every night. And Shikajiba said, wow, but a curse is only on the body, it's not on the soul. We will manage together. And so they did. And night came, and the clothes on Kumba turned into a woman's dress. And the dress grew out of the body. So there was no way to avoid becoming a woman. And Kumba shed tears. Shikajiba thought they were tears of sorrow, but they were really tears of happiness because Kumba had become a woman again and was getting closer to being united with her husband. And so for the next month or so, they would be Kumba and Shikajiba during the day, and at night, Shikajiba and a woman in the same bed. Finally, Kudela couldn't stand it anymore. She said, I've been a woman for a while now, and I want to experience being a woman. And there's nobody in the entire world that I would rather share my life with than you. Shikajiba said, okay. So, Kudela had her husband back during the night. This is the power of a desire applied to a spiritual exercise. The value of this process, well, dangerous. Dangerous means it could take you away for lifetimes from your spiritual pursuit. If successful, could accelerate it dramatically. So let me ask you, this is a rhetorical question, I'll answer it in just a second. You have a spiritual exercise that completely satisfies you sexually, and it gets you what you want in a material way. Anything you want. Okay, so normally when you have sex in a normal way, there's always a depletion of energy. When it's done in a tantric manner, not only is the sex incredibly powerful, it leaves you more energized after you're finished. So one of the unintended consequences is you become more horny. Why? Because you have sex and you have more energy. So if you look at the story of Kudela and Shikajiba and think about the implications from all that, then the explanation of reality that she talks about and giving up the ego becomes much more well explained. finally, Kudala, seeing this change that came over Shikajiba and the energy that he was accumulating, she decided to give him a final test. And she created an environment where a sexual bordello, and where she knew Shikajiba would find it. And she created a man. And she waited till Shikajiba was coming back, and she started kissing and fondling of him. And Shikajiba came in the door. He saw her kissing him and turned around and walked out. So Kudala saw him and ran out. And what Shikajiba said, why did you leave? You know, you should have stayed and consummated. You were having a good time. And she says, well, I didn't. I'm sorry, Kudala said to him. I didn't intend to do this. A woman is 10 times more likely to fall into sex than a man is, inadvertently. And Shikajiba said, well, yes, that's true. And really, this is not you, okay? You're still my friend, Kumbha. And the woman is Durvasa's curse. So we will remain friends, but we won't have sex anymore. This is what Kudala had been waiting for. And she changed back into her form as Kudala. And Shikajiva was astounded. Said, oh, you look just like my wife. Well, guess what? I am your wife. And Shikajiva said, you brought about a change within me. And Kudala said, don't thank me. I did it for my own benefit. And Shikajiva said, bless every woman that does what you do for their own benefit. Through your grace, I have become enlightened. The power of sex to become realized. Anyway, this concludes the story for Josh. Thank you so much for listening.